Thank you, everyone. Good morning. I'm going to slow down a little bit from the high-flying world of Blue Yonder, Google, AI, and everything else. I'm going to bring us down to the ground realities of labor, the demographic shift which we have observed specifically post-COVID. Just as an intro, prior to having these franchise businesses, I worked my last job at Blue Yonder, leading the industry strategy for supply chain execution, which is really where Scott, 𝙩𝙩, and Walt, and a few others, we got connected. And great clips, I have 8 hair salons as a franchise in Pennsylvania and Maryland market. And Bright Star Care, which is a home health care company. We have businesses in the northeast Pennsylvania, so Allentown and Mount Poconos and Scranton area. And roughly about 60% of my cost is in labor for my Bright Star business, and roughly about 40 to 50% of my cost for Great Clips is in labor cost. So as you can imagine, labor is an extremely important component of what I track, what we do on an everyday basis, and how it has impacted everything. Now, there are some forces which are shaping how our demographic shift is happening across the entire country, for that matter. Not just the areas I operate in, even though that's really kind of where I honed in on in most of our discussions here. But I'm also going to try and do my best to bring it up to the national level as to what are some of these trends which are kind of shaping how we will eventually get your next teammate. Is that next teammate of yours going to be an AI agent? Or is that next teammate of yours is a Gen Z person or a millennial? And how does it all what is impacting them? And how it's all kind of hopefully come together as a society here. Not just the technology-focused piece of it, not just the real estate focused, but us as humans creating new jobs in this market. So there are 4 trends I'll talk about. Workforce specifically, which is really going to be the key component here. The other one is, of course, Paula and others kind of alluded to, is the tariff and the inflation area, which has really kind of accelerated a lot of these trends in a different direction, more different direction than we would have ideally thought 10 years ago. Those of us who are old enough to see inflation trends less than 3%, less than 2% for the longest period of time, seeing it in 2 digits was kind of like a shock. And everything we have had to encounter since those times has trickled down in the rest of the economy. And I think Keith alluded to a little bit in terms of the older buildings and how real estate has kind of impacted it. So we'll talk a little bit about the inflation impact and the labor impact there. Immigration, this is a big deal. This is a very big deal, and I'll hit on a little bit in terms of the farm labor and non-farm labor. Those are the 2 trends BLS tracks, the non-farm piece and the farm piece. And last but not the least, AI and automation in general. So those of us in the warehouse space, we have done tons of automation in the past in our warehouses, production facilities. But what's so new about it? So we'll chat a little bit about that. And last but not the least, I'll hit on some of the trends in terms of what do you really need to expect in the next 5 to 10 years, for that matter. In terms of what we do on a daily basis. So some of these slides are at a very high level, so I'm going to skip through this pretty quickly. But when you think about the labor market and how many jobs are being created, BLS tracks this data on a state-by-state, zip code by zip code basis. It's pretty stagnant, but 3.3 is still a pretty reasonable number when you think about it in terms of the new job growth rates. Certainly, different states have different levels of job growth depending on the industry they are focused on or they are strong in. But the bigger piece here is the semiconductor industry. So last, I would say about 3 or 4 years ago, I believe, 2, 3 years maybe, the CHIPS Act, which was created to create more stimulation in the semiconductor production back home in the US. That has definitely created more jobs. There's more work to be done on that, but that has definitely led the growth, along with, of course, all the AI buzz related with semiconductor. However, on the negative side, close to 100,000 jobs have been lost in the manufacturing sector, which is one big reason why you see the push towards more and more manufacturing back home, but it's becoming harder and harder every single day to bring those jobs back. And the bigger ones are really the high labor component. For those of you who may have worked in the automotive industry, welding and electric assembly in the cars are still not completely automated. You see a lot of those robots working in the automotive plants. They are not necessarily doing some of these very intricate jobs. And minus those jobs, everything else has been automated. And those are the ones which were mainly affected by some of these job losses. The tariff impact, it's a great migration of money, if you will. We charge more tariffs. Wherever we are charging those tariffs, they eventually raise the price and they pass it back on to the consumers. So on an average, let's say China, for example, if we charge them 30% tariffs, 27% of it, based on the data we've collected, data the government has collected, BLS and others, they're basically showing roughly 27% has been passed on to you and me as an end consumer. So it's a great migration of money. It's coming in and it's going out, and roughly about 3% have been retained, or if you will, absorbed by the manufacturers. When you think about the inflation, it is still reasonably high, and which was to be expected, right, given the last slide we saw with respect to the tariffs. So certainly it's inching up a little bit, which is the reason why you see the Feds having a little hard time, grappling with, the balance between job creation and inflation, and they are really struggling, and for all the right reasons, because they have to worry about keeping the inflation low, but at the same time, the job creation is not there yet. Immigration does not help on that matter. Tons and tons of the farms are struggling. I live in Pennsylvania in the farm country. Right next to me is a little known town called Kennett Square. They are very big into mushroom production. And their mushroom production yield, as well as the crops, they are not being helped by lack of labor availability in that area. So certainly the farms are struggling, and the same thing with a friend of mine who lives in Seattle area. He was telling me about some fruit picking in that area. They're struggling to pick up fruits. And again, some of these things you don't get to hear every day in the news, but these are some real things which you and I are going to the grocery store to buy, and they are not necessarily helping the end growers, the farmers. On the tech side, all of you majority of you work in the tech space. I did too, not anymore on that side, but there is a lot of concern as far as tech workers being available, the high talent, the bar is set pretty high in terms of what talent you want for an AI type workforce, and that's not there. And then, of course, you have H-1B visa. I came here to this country 24 years ago on an H-1B visa, so certainly it's near and dear to my heart to see it where it is now. But at the same time, those are some of the challenges on the tech side as well you're going to face. The bigger concern, though, on the tech side is the ROI on the AI. Where is it going to come from? Is it going to come from eliminating high-end jobs, or is it going to come from eliminating $15 an hour job? So a bunch of statistics out there with respect to the number of tech job losses. Some of them may have been driven primarily by overhiring post-COVID. There was a lot of overhiring in that market, in that post 0% interest rate environment. There was a lot of overhiring. So some of that was bound to come down. But more recently, it's about the capital projects more focused on AI build, and therefore not having enough cash to dedicate towards the operational aspects of creating more tech jobs. This is a very interesting org structure example I heard somewhere. A typical pyramid, when you think about the analysts on the bottom, a fresh out-of-school graduate on the bottom, then eventually they move up in a pyramid structure. What I saw being described by socioeconomics and other org structure designers is becoming, the pyramid's moving towards becoming a hexagon. And what I mean by that is the fresh jobs are now going to be done, some of them, by AI with the help of mid-level managers. So you're going to find a ton of mid-level managers who are going to be improving their own productivity with the help of AI and not necessarily needing as many as fresh out-of-school graduates. So it's an interesting observation. Again, we haven't seen enough data points to say that this will exactly how it will look like, but this is exactly what's being predicted. We have seen warehouse world where automation has been rampant in the last roughly 15 years. Let's call it post the financial meltdown. And it was driven by multiple reasons. The e-commerce world was still growing in that space. The arms race, if you will, from retailers and now even consumers, consumer product companies, was not there yet up until 2009, 2010 timeframe. Amazon was still kind of the talk of the town in terms of how quickly they were able to adopt building a two-day network for the Prime. But in the last 15 years, and I worked at companies like Fortnite and JLL, where we were looking for investments like $100 million and $200 million and $300 million in installing auto stores and ASRSs and Geek Plus robots and others. That number has now given us a lot of maturity in the warehouse automation space. A lot of these technologies now are kind of mature technologies. People don't question how AutoStore works, because it works. We know it works. People don't question how certain robots and AMRs work. It just works. Amazon just installed 1 millionth robot through their prior acquisition of Kiva back in the day. And their cost to operate a warehouse robot is about $3 an hour, versus a human worker costs about $24 an hour. And this is like full benefits and everything included. So you can clearly see where some of those tasks would be moving towards. And we are not the only ones who see these statistics. The workers who work in the warehouse, they see it too. They feel it too. And that's why there aren't enough of them. There are not enough of them available in the market, because they can see this trend moving in that direction. And where are they all going? So before I go to that, where they are going, think about this statistic here in terms of college graduates. So all of us have looked into the colleges as a way to make, bring our society up, moving up from middle class, from lower class to middle class, et cetera. And there is a lot of debt we have taken on as a society in terms of the college costs. There are now more college graduates today than there were 10 years ago. But there aren't enough jobs available for them because of AI and a bunch of other trends we talked about in the last few minutes. But where are these jobs? I own hair salons, and I can tell you, I don't find enough hairstylists. And some of you may or may not have known how much they make an hour. $40 an hour. One of our hairstylists we just hired, her boyfriend works as a welder at Philadelphia Navy Shipyard. He makes $40 an hour. And roughly half or 2/3 of this $40 an hour is in tips, which is not going to be taxed. So when you think about it, equivalent, you're actually making more, keeping more if you work as a hairstylist. But are there enough of them? Short answer is no. And why? Because we as a society thought 10, 15, 20 years ago that a trade is not a good profession to be in, and you have to move upstream in terms of get college graduates, college education, etc. What education do you need for becoming a hairstylist? High school. You don't need anything more than that. And even high school, you really don't need. As long as you can read, write, that's good enough. Cosmetology school, you go there, get your license in a year and a half, and that's good enough. Most of my hairstylists make close to $70,000 a year. $70,000. My first job after college, a bit, 20-some years ago, paid me $30,000. This is the number we're talking about, right? Stark difference from what it was 20, 30-some years ago to what it is now. Healthcare. This is another company I own. 85% of net new jobs created were from healthcare in this country. And if you were to look through economic development activities in all 50 states, majority of the states, and I'm talking about close to 80% of the states, their job growth engine, healthcare, is in the top 2 or 3. Every single state. Exception being, some of the western states where semiconductor activity is pretty high, like for example in Arizona, for example, wind energy in the Idaho and Wyoming and a few other areas. Minus that, healthcare is in the top 2 or 3 job creations in every single state. However, where are those jobs within healthcare? Majority are in non-skilled labor, caregiving, personal care aides. They don't pay $70,000, $80,000 a year. They pay $15 an hour, $18 an hour. There is enough labor pool available there, and that's who I employ. 120 of them work for us in our little franchise in the northeast corridor of Pennsylvania. And they're happy to have some of these jobs because their job prospects otherwise are not as good. One other trend to think about, which we didn't have to think about up until more recently, 40% of them are foreign-born. Given the lack of immigration flow in the last few years, this is an area where we are banking on, as a society, to have people take care of us, but they are not born here, and they are migrating from some other country, and that inflow is now going to be reduced. So if you were to ask me what keeps me up at night, this is what keeps me up at night, not AI. This is what keeps me up at night because we are working with live humans who are providing care to some of your parents. I think one of you came up to me and mentioned that one of your family members or someone who was cared for by Bright Star Care, one of our nurses or caregivers. And I will need this too, by the way, 20 years from now. So this is what's happening in the healthcare space. Now, when you tie it back to where some of these folks are coming from labor aspect, and this is where some of the other demographic shifts happening. Women participation in the workforce is a very, very important metric BLS and others track. This is women participation ratio tracked by St. Louis Fed. The numbers have gone down dramatically from 60.1% in 1999 to 56.9%. And keep in mind, during this time, the population has also grown. So what does it mean in terms of how many less people we have in the workforce now? Roughly about 5.5 million less women in the workforce. Imagine how much more can you do with more workforce available. Whether they are in retail, whether they are in healthcare, it doesn't matter. But having more participation from one specific gender here is incredibly important to the economic growth of the country. But why are there less women in the workforce? Majority took a lot of time off during COVID time. Kids were at school, so they decided this is what's important, family, and that's really what drove the trickle-down effect of lesser and lesser and lesser participation. Other reasons, cost of daycare. I don't know how many of you have young kids who are, I know you talked about it, the cost of daycare. I mean, when my kids, roughly about 10 years ago, when they were going, it's doubled since then. So when you're working in a $15-hour job, you're better off just sitting at home rather than having to pay for expensive daycare. And that's one big reason why there are lesser and lesser women in the workforce. Affordable housing. How many of you have had their home prices almost double in the last 5, 7 years, 8 years? A majority of us, for the most part, right? Almost double. When you think about what that does to our kids, my oldest is about to go in senior year in high school, and next year she'll head to college in a nursing program. And our next door home sold for $800,000. How long before she will be able to afford a home that size? It's going to be hard. And that's what we are tracking. These are the 3 counties in Pennsylvania where I have majority of my workforce coming from. And I see this every single day. Majority of them moving more and more towards renting because they cannot afford to move into a home which costs $300,000, $400,000, $500,000, $600,000. So Chester County, which is where I live in, home prices, the price point is high, but at the same time, the price is only about 64% higher than what it was 6, 7 years ago. Monroe County, which is where most of my caregivers live and nurses live, even though the base home price is lower, the percentage increase is more than doubled. And the wages haven't really kept up with this increase. And that's really where what happens is they move towards living farther and farther and living and commuting more and more. And that leads into not many people showing up for work, not many people showing up for work on time. The turnover rate is higher. I mean, you name it. Everything which trickles down from there. This is my last slide, and I have some good news here. So, automation acceleration, which you live through every single day, it will continue. It's not going anywhere. And it's going to come to retail. One of the Indian restaurants I went to, they were having robots take my orders and deliver food to me because they couldn't afford to have margins are so thin in the food industry and retail in general that they said we are not going to have human waiters. So very interesting concept. More and more IT and material handling equipment as well as real estate infrastructure projects, much like what Keith alluded to earlier on. As far as buildings becoming more and more costlier, and they are going to have a lot more of the capital tied to it. The adoption of AI for repeatable tasks, this will continue, gain more and more maturity. So one example I'm testing on right now is recruiting through AI agents and having on-call people. Like if you were to call to my company after hours, I'm having an AI agent. And I texted my company, my provider, and they said actually they are running on GCP, by the way, Paula. So it's going to become more and more common. And especially in a high turnover environment, especially if you have retail stores, if your clients have retail stores, you're going to see more of the high turnover jobs being moved more towards the AI recruiting. What does it mean in terms of some of the other jobs you may have? If you are a union shop, definitely expect jobs back on the table as far as some of those discussions are concerned. They are worried, much like what you saw with the UPS negotiation about a year and a half back, where they were looking to have a robot doing deliveries. They had to pull it back simply because the unions were just not enamored by some of those conditions. Any job which requires personalized one-on-one care, which cannot be automated yet, you're going to see higher inflation there. The haircut prices for me have gone up in last 5 years roughly about 70%, because I've had to pay a lot more in order to keep up with that. You're going to see a lot more of that for any non-repeatable personalized tasks. Your personal care, your hair, or whether it's your aesthetics or anything else driven work, you're going to have to pay a little bit more because those jobs aren't automatable yet. Eventually it may happen, but not yet. And I hope humanoids, hopefully they come fast enough to do some of these tasks, but some of the senior care work which we do, it's going to be extremely hard. We lift them up, we bathe them, we do beds for them, we do cooking for them. It's going to be hard for me to say a humanoid is going to actually replace them yet. But those jobs, they don't pay as much, and the economics are a little lopsided there. But expect a little bit more inflation in those markets, in these areas, than what you see today. I know I'm out of time, but thank you. Hopefully I've given you some hope that it's going to get better and better every day, but not there yet. Excellent. Thank you, everyone.